Okay guys, we're going to be reading the Prehistoric Aegean, I'm going to pronounce it as. It's chapter 4 in Gardner's art history book. Hopefully I'll be able to get through these 15 pages quickly because I put this off too long and I'm really hoping that I can get this in because I've gotten pretty close to my deadline now. Okay. Framing the era, Greece in the Age of Heroes. When, in the 8th century BCE, Homer immortalized in the Iliad and the Odyssey the great war between the Greeks and the Trojans, and the subsequent adventure-packed journey home wow, we're really not off to a good start here. Odysseus. I could probably pronounce that better if it wasn't split between two lines. The epic poet was describing a time long before his own. A golden age of larger-than-life heroes. Since the late 19th century, archaeologists have gradually uncovered impressive remains of that heroic age, including the palaces of the legendary king Minos at Knossos, on Crete, and of King Agamemnon at Mycenaean on the Greek mainland. But they've also recovered thousands of less glamorous objects and inscriptions that provide a contemporaneous view of life in the prehistoric... God, what's wrong with me today? View of life in the prehistoric Aegean, unfiltered by the romantic lens of Homer and later writers. One of the most intriguing finds to date is the painted Minoan, named after King Minos, sarcophagus from Hagia Triada on the southern coast of Crete. The paintings adorning the sides of the small coffin are closely related in technique, color scheme, and figure style to the much larger frescoes on the walls of Minoan palaces, but the subject is foreign to the royal repertoire. Befitting the function of the sarcophagus as a burial container, the paintings illustrate the funerary rites in honor of a man. They furnish welcome information about Minoan religion, which still remains obscure despite more than a century of excavation on Crete. On one long side of the sarcophagus, 4 women and a male double flute player. Wow, I hope I figure out what that is. Double flute. A double flute player take part in a ritual centered on an ox tied up on a table. One of the women makes an offering at an altar. In contrast to this unified narrative, the other side is divided into 2 scenes. At the left, a woman pours liquid, perhaps the blood of a sacrificial ox, from a jar into a large vessel on a stand between 2 double axes. Behind her, a second woman carries 2 more jars, and a male figure plays the harp. Consistent with the common convention in many ancient cultures, all of the women have light skin and the men dark skin. To the right, 3 men carry 2 sculpted sacrificial animals and a model of a boat to offer to a dead man, whom the painter represented as standing in front of his tomb, just as the biblical Lazarus, raised from the dead, will later appear in medieval art. The precise meaning of the sarcophagus painting is uncertain, but there is no doubt that they document well-established Minoan rites in honor of the dead, which included the sacrifice of animals accompanied by music and the deposit of gifts in the tomb. Until scholars can decipher the written language of the Minoans, artworks such as the Hagia Triada sarcophagus will be the primary tools for reconstructing life on Crete, and in Greece as a whole, during the millennium before the birth of Homer. Greece before Homer. In the Iliad, Homer describes the might and splendor of the Greek armies poised before the walls of Troy. Quote, "Clan after clan poured out from the ships and huts into the plain, innumerable as the leaves and blossoms in their season. The Athenians from their splendid citadel, the citizens of Argos and Tiryns of the great walls, troops from the great stronghold of Mycenae, from wealthy Corinth, from Knossos, Phaesos, and the other troops that had their homes in Crete of the 100 towns." End quote. I am reading this word for word, I think that's an excerpt. So that's I hope I'm getting this across correctly. Okay. The Greeks had come from far and wide, from the mainland and the islands, to seek revenge against Paris, the Trojan prince who had abducted Helen, wife of the king Menelaus of Sparta. The Iliad, composed around 750 BCE, is the first great work of Greek literature. Until about 1870, the world regarded Homer's epic poem as pure fiction. Scholars paid little heed to the bard as a historian, instead attributing the profusion of names and places in his writings to the rich abundance of his imagination. The prehistory of Greece remained shadowy and lost in an impenetrable world of myth. Troy and Mycenaean. In the late 1800s, however, Heinrich Schliemann, definitely didn't pronounce that right, a wealthy German businessman turned archaeologist, proved that scholars had not given Homer his due. Between 1870 and his death 20 years later, Schliemann, whose methods later archaeologists have harshly criticized, uncovered some of the very cities that Homer named. In 1870, he began work at Hisarlik, on the northwestern coast of Turkey, which a British archaeologist, Frank Calvert, 1828 to 1908, had postulated was the site of Homer's Troy. Schliemann dug into a vast mound and found a number of fortified cities built on the remains of one another. Fire had destroyed one of them in the 13th century BCE. This, scholars now agree, was the Troy of King Priam and his son Paris. Schliemann continued his excavations at Mycenae on the Greek mainland, where, he believed, King Agamemnon, Menelaus' brother, had once ruled. Here his finds were even more startling, among them a massive fortress palace with an imposing gateway and a circle of royal graves. Other tombs featuring stone domes beneath earthen mounds, quantities of gold jewelry, drinking cups and masks, and inlaid bronze weapons. Schliemann's discoveries revealed a magnificent civilization far older than the famous vestiges of classical Greece that had remained visible in Athens and elsewhere. Subsequent excavations proved that Mycenae had not been the only center of this fabulous civilization. Minoan Crete. Another legendary figure was Minos, the king of Knossos on the island of Crete, who exacted from Athens a tribute of youths and maidens to be fed to the Minotaur, a creature half bull and half man that inhabited a vast labyrinth. In 1900, an Englishman, Arthur Evans, began work at Knossos, where he uncovered a palace resembling a maze. Evans named the people who had constructed it Minoans, after their mythological king. Archaeologists soon discovered further evidence of the Minoans at Phaistos, Hagia Triada, and other sites, including Gornia, which Harriet Boyd Hawes, an American archaeologist and one of the first women of any nationality to direct a major excavation, explored between 1901 and 1904. More recently, archaeologists have excavated important Minoan remains at many other locations on Crete. They have also explored contemporaneous sites on other islands in the Aegean Sea, named after Agis, father of King Theseus of Athens, most notably Thera. Together, the buildings, paintings, sculptures, and other finds on the Greek mainland on the Aegean Islands attest to the wealth and sophistication of the people who occupied Greece in that once obscure heroic age celebrated in later Greek mythology. Aegean Archaeology today. Archaeologists know much more today about the prehistoric societies of the Aegean than they did a generation ago. Arguably more important for the understanding of Aegean prehistory than the art objects that tourists flock to see in the museums of Athens and Iraklion, near Knossos, are the many documents that archaeologists have found written in scripts conventionally called Linear A and Linear B. The progress made during the past several decades in deciphering Linear B texts has provided a welcome corrective to the romantic treasure hunting approach of Schliemann and Evans. Scholars now recognize Linear B as an early form of Greek, and they have begun to reconstruct Mycenaean civilization by referring to records made at that time, and not just to Homer's heroic account. Archaeologists now also know that humans inhabited Greece as far back as the early Paleolithic period, and that village life was firmly established in Greece and on Crete in Neolithic times. The heyday of the ancient Aegean, however, did not arrive until the second millennium BCE, well after the emergence of the river valley civilizations of Mesopotamia, Egypt, and South Asia. The prehistoric Aegean had 3 geographic areas, and each has its own distinctive artistic identity. I don't want to say this wrong. Cycladic? Yeah. Cycladic art is the art of the Cyclades Islands. I'm sorry, it starts with like the cycle, so we'll see how this goes. Cyclades Islands, so named because they circle, yes, thank God I got it right, around Delos, as well as the adjacent islands in the Aegean, excluding Crete. Minoan art encompasses the art of Crete. Helladic art is the art of the Greek mainland, Hellas, in Greek. Archaeologists subdivide each area chronologically into early, middle, and late periods, designating the art of the late Helladic period, Mycenaean, after Agamemnon's great citadel of Mycenae. Sorry, those are my joints if you can hear them. Okay. Cycladic art. Marble was abundantly available in the superb quarries of the Aegean Islands, especially on Naxos, and the sculptors of the early Cycladic period produced large quantities of marble statuettes of distinctive form. Today, collectors revere those Cycladic figurines, see Cycladic statuettes above, because of their striking abstract forms, which called to mind some modern sculptures. Syros women. Most of the Cycladic sculptures represent nude women, as do many of their Stone Age predecessors in the Aegean, Anatolia, Mesopotamia, and Western Europe. The Cycladic examples often depict women with their arms folded across their abdomens. The sculptures, which excavators have found both in graves and in settlements, vary in height from a few inches to almost life-size. The statuette illustrated here comes from a grave on the island of Syros and is about 1.5 feet tall, but only about a half-inch thick. Using obsidian tools, the sculptor carved the figurine and then polished the surface with emery. The Cycladic artist's rendition of the human body is highly schematic. Large, simple triangles dominate the form. The head, the body itself, which tapers from exceptionally broad shoulders to tiny feet, and the incised triangular pubis. Other examples have more rounded forms, but the feet always have the toes pointed downward, so the figures cannot stand upright. All of the statuettes must have been placed on their backs in the grave, lying down like the deceased. Archaeologists speculate whether the Syros statuette and the many other similar Cycladic figurines known today represent dead women or fertility figures or goddesses. Whether those depicted are mortals or deities, the sculptors took pains to emphasize the breasts as well as the pubic area. In the Syros statuette, a slight swelling of the belly may suggest pregnancy. Traces of the paint found on some of the Cycladic figurines indicate that at least parts of these sculptures were colored. The now almost featureless faces would have had painted eyes and mouths in addition to the sculpted noses. Red and blue necklaces and bracelets, as well as painted dots on the cheeks and necks, characterize a number of the surviving figurines. Keros musician. Fewer Cycladic statuettes represent men. The most elaborate of the male figurines portray seated musicians, such as the harp player from Keros. Wedged between the echoing shapes of chair and instrument, he may be playing for the deceased in the afterlife, although, again, the meaning of these sculptures remains elusive. The harpist reflects the same preference for simple geometric shapes and large flat planes as do the female figures. Still, the artist shows a keen interest in recording the elegant shape of what must have been a prized possession, the harp with a duckbill or swan head ornament. Compare the form of Sumerian harps, figure 2-6, in the top right, whatever. One woman's grave contained figurines of both a musician and a reclining woman. The burial of a male figure together with the body of a woman suggests that the harp players are not images of dead men, but it does not prove that the female figurines represent dead women. The musician might be entertaining the deceased herself, not her image, or be engaged in commemorative rites honoring the dead. The harp player on the Hypatia sarcophagus may indicate some continuity in funerary customs and beliefs from the Cycladic to the Minoan period in the Aegean. Given the absence of written documents in Greece at this date, as everywhere else in prehistoric times, and the lack of contextual information for most Cycladic sculptures, art historians cannot be sure of the meaning of these statuettes. It is likely, in fact, that the same form took on different meanings in different contexts. Minoan Art. During the 3rd millennium BCE, both on the Aegean Islands and on the Greek mainland, most settlements were small and consisted only of simple buildings. Rarely were the dead buried with costly offerings such as the Cycladic statuettes just examined. By contrast, the hallmark of the opening centuries of the 2nd millennium, the Middle Minoan period on Crete, is the construction of large palaces. Architecture. The first, or Old Palace, period ended abruptly around 1700 BCE, when fire destroyed these grand structures, probably following an earthquake. Rebuilding began almost immediately, and archaeologists consider the ensuing late Minoan, New Palace, period, the Golden Age of Crete, an era when the great Western civilization emerged. Although conventionally called palaces, the rebuilt structures may not have served as royal residences. They were administrative, commercial, and religious centers with courtyards for pageants, ceremonies, and games, and dozens of offices, shrines, and storerooms for the collection and distribution of produce and goods. These huge complexes were the centers of Minoan life. The principal palaces on Crete are at Naxos, Physos, Malia, Katozacro, and Khania. The Minoans laid out all of them along similar lines. The size and number of these important centers, as well as the rich finds they have yielded, attest to the power and prosperity of the Minoans. Knossos. The largest Cretan palace at Knossos was the legendary home of King Minos. Here, the hero Theseus hunted the bull-man Minotaur in his labyrinth. According to the myth, after defeating the monster, Theseus found his way out of the maze-like complex only with the aid of the king's daughter, Ariadne. Sorry. She had given Theseus a spindle of thread to mark his path through the labyrinth and safely find his way out again. In fact, the English word labyrinth derives from the intricate plan and scores of rooms of the Knossos palace. The labrys, double axe, serves as a recurring motif in the Minoan palace and in Minoan art, generally referring to sacrificial slaughter. The labyrinth was the house of the double axe. That's in quotes, by the way, house of the double axe. The Knossos palace was a rambling structure built against the upper slopes and across the top of a low hill that rises from a fertile plain. All around the palace proper were mansions and villas of the Minoan elite. The central feature of the palace was its great rectangular court. The builders carefully planned the structure with clusters of rooms of similar function grouped around this primary space. On the west side of the court, a north-south corridor separates official and ceremonial rooms from the magazines, where the Minoans stored wine, grain, oil, and honey in large jars. On the east side of the court, a smaller east-west corridor separates the administrative areas to the south from the workrooms to the north. At the northwest corner of the palace is a theater-like area with steps on two sides that may have served as seats. This arrangement is a possible forerunner of the later Greek theater. Its purpose is unknown, but the feature also appears in the Phasos Palace. The Knossos Palace was complex in elevation as well as plan. Around the central court, there were as many as 3 stories, and on the south and east sides, where the terrain sloped off sharply, the palace had 4 or 5 stories. Interior light and air wells, some with staircases, proved necessary illumination and ventilation. The Minoans also addressed such issues as drainage of rainwater. At Knossos, a remarkably efficient system of terracotta, baked clay, pipes lie under the enormous building. The Cretan palaces were sturdy structures with thick walls composed of rough, unshaped fieldstones embedded in clay. For corners and around door and window openings, the builders used large stone blocks, especially for the walls facing the central court. The painted wood columns, which Evan restored in cement at Knossos, have distinctive capitals and shafts. The bulbous, cushion-like Minoan capitals resemble those of the later Greek Doric order, but the column shafts, essentially stylized inverted tree trunks, taper from a wide top to a narrower base, the opposite of both Egyptian and later Greek columns. Painting. Mural paintings liberally adorned the palace at Knossos, constituting one of its most striking features. The brightly painted walls and the red shafts and black capitals of the wood columns produced an extraordinarily rich effect. The paintings depict many aspects of Minoan life, bull leaping, processions, and ceremonies, and of nature, birds, animals, flowers, and marine life. La Parisienne. From a ceremonial scene of an uncertain significance comes the fragmented dubbed La Parisienne, the Parisian woman. On its discovery, because of the elegant dress, elaborate coiffure, and full rouged lips of the young woman depicted, some have identified her as a priestess taking part in a religious ritual, but because the figure has no arms, it is more likely a statue of a goddess. Although the representation is still convention-bound, note especially the oversized frontal eye and the profile head. The charm and freshness of the mural are undeniable. Unlike the Egyptians who painted in fresco secco, dry fresco, but the Minoans coated the rough fabric of their rubble walls with a fine white lime plaster and were apparently the first to use a true buon fresco method in which the painter applies the pigments while the walls are still wet. The color consequently becomes chemically bonded to the plaster after it dries. The Minoan painters therefore had to execute their work rapidly, in contrast to Egyptian practice, which permitted slower, more deliberate work. Sorry about the beeping if you can hear it. It's just my Discord on my computer. Bull leaping. Another fresco from the palace at Knossos depicts the Minoan ceremony of bull leaping, in which young men grasped the horns of a bull and vaulted onto its back, a perilous and extremely difficult acrobatic maneuver. Excavators recovered only fragments of the full composition. The dark patches are original, the rest is a modern restoration. The Minoan artist provides no setting, instead focusing all attention on the 3 protagonists and the fearsome bull. The young women have fair skin, and the leaping youth has dark skin, in accordance with the widely accepted ancient convention for distinguishing female and male, as on the Hyga Triada sarcophagus. The painter brilliantly suggests the powerful charge of the bull, which has all 4 legs off the ground, by elongating the animal's shape and using sweeping lines to form a funnel of energy, beginning at the very narrow hindquarters of the bull and culminating in its large, sharp horns. The highly animated human figures also have stylized shapes, with typically Minoan pinched waists. Although the profile pose with the frontal eye was a familiar convention in Egypt and Mesopotamia, the elegant Cretan figures, with their long curly hair and proud and self-confident bearing, have no parallels in the art of other early cultures. In contrast to the angularity of the figures in Egyptian wall paintings, the curving lines that the Minoan artists employed suggests the elasticity of living and moving beings. Thera. Much better preserved than the Knossos frescoes are the mural paintings that Greek archaeologists have discovered in their ongoing excavations at Akrotiri on the island of Thera in the Cyclades. Cyclades. Some 60 miles north of Crete. In the late Cycladic period, Thera was artistically, and possibly also politically, within the Minoan orbit. The Akrotiri murals are invaluable additions to the fragmentary and frequently mis-restored frescoes from Crete. The excellent condition of the Theran paintings is due to an enormous volcanic explosion on the island that buried and my eating turned on. This is... You know what? I really shouldn't be expecting anything else at this point. Okay. The Akrotiri murals are invaluable additions to the fragment... Oh, I said that already. Sorry. Okay. The excellent condition of the Theran paintings is due to an enormous volcanic eruption on the island that buried Akrotiri in volcanic pumice and ash, making it a kind of Pompeii of the prehistoric Aegean. Okay, skipping that thing. The Akrotiri frescoes decorated the walls of houses and shrines, not the walls of a great palace, such as Minos' at Knossos, and therefore the number of painted walls from the site is especially impressive. The almost perfectly preserved mural painting from Akrotiri, known as the Spring Fresco, is the largest and most complete prehistoric example of a pure landscape painting. And then it explains what the landscape painting is. No, thank you. And seascapes are a key element of many of the mural paintings found at Akrotiri. In each case, however, the artist's aim was not to render the rocky island terrain realistically, but rather to capture its essence. In figure 4-9, the irrationally undulating and vividly colored rocks, the graceful lilies swaying in the cool island breezes, and the darting swallows express the vigor of growth, the delicacy of flowering, and the lightness of bird song and flight. In the lyrical language of curving line, the artist celebrates the rhythms of nature. The spring fresco represents the polar opposite of the first efforts at mural painting in the caves of Paleolithic Europe, where animals, and occasionally humans, appeared as isolated figures with no indication of setting. Crocus gatherers. A rocky landscape is also the setting for the figures depicted in room 3 of building Zeste 3 at Akrotiri. The room probably served as a shrine in which girls took part in puberty initiation rites. What? Frescoes decorated the walls on 2 levels. In one section, not illustrated, a young girl with a bleeding foot sits on a rock. Approaching her from behind is a bare-breasted woman carrying a necklace, probably a gift for the bleeding girl. In the section reproduced here, 2 elegantly dressed young women, bedecked with bracelets and hoop earrings, gather crocuses. One has a shaved head with a serpentine lock of hair at the back, indicating that she is a young girl. Crocus flowers produce saffron, used for the yellow dye of some of the garments that the figures wear. Saffron may also have been used as a painkiller for menstrual cramps. In another section of the mural, not illustrated, girls carry baskets full of the flowers they have picked. They bring the flowers to a woman seated on a stepped platform. Scholars have identified the woman, who is flanked by a blue monkey and a griffin, a mythological winged lion with an eagle's head. as a goddess rather than a mortal, but the precise meaning of the scenes depicted in the fresco remains uncertain. Minoan Pottery. Nature as a preferred subject for paintings is documented on Minoan pottery, even before the period of the new Cretan palaces. During the Middle Minoan period, Cretan ceramists, you know what I mean, fashioned sophisticated shapes using newly introduced potter's wheels, and decorated their vases in a distinctive and fully polychromatic style. These kamares ware vessels, named for the cave on the slope of Mount Ida, where they were first discovered, have been found in quantity at Phasos and Knossos. Some examples come from as far away as Egypt and testify to the expansive trade network of the Minoans. On the jars shown here, as on other Kamares vases, the painter applied creamy white and reddish-brown decorations to a rich black ground. The central motif is a great leaping fish, and perhaps a fishnet surrounded by a host of curvilinear abstract patterns, including waves and spirals. The swirling lines evoke life in the sea, and both the abstract and the natural forms beautifully complement the shape of the vessel. The sea and the creatures inhabiting it are also inspired the late Minoan octopus flask. Ooh. From Palais Castro, sure. Decorated in what art historians have dubbed the marine style. The tentacles of the octopus reach out over the curving surfaces of the vessel, embracing the piece and emphasizing its volume. The flask is a masterful realization of the relationship between the vessel's decoration and its shape, always an issue for the vase painter. This later jar, which is contemporaneous with the new palaces at Knossos and elsewhere, differs markedly from its Kamares ware predecessor in color. Not only is the octopus vase more muted in tone, but the late Minoan artists also reversed the earlier scheme and placed dark silhouettes on a light ground. Dark on light coloration remained the norm for about a millennium in Greece, until about 530 BCE, when the light figures and a dark background emerged once again, albeit in a very different form. As the preferred manner, see the invention of the red figure painting, page 121. Okay, I guess that's it. Sculpture. In contrast to the contemporaneous civilizations of Mesopotamia and Egypt, Minoan Crete has yielded no trace of temples or life-size statues of gods, kings, or monsters. Large painted wood images may have once existed, La Parisienne may be a depiction of one of them, but what remains of Minoan sculpture is uniformly small in scale. Snake Goddess. One of the most striking finds from the palace at Knossos is the faience. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that right. A low-fired, opaque glass-like silicate statuette popularly known as the Snake Goddess. Reconstructed from many pieces and in large part modern in its present form, is one of the several... Sorry, there's a fly. Ah! On my eyelash. Why? Okay. Reconstructed in many pieces and in large part modern in its present form, it is one of the several similar figurines that some scholars believe may represent mortal priestesses rather than a deity. The prominently exposed breasts suggest, however, that these figurines stand in the long line of prehistoric fertility images usually considered divinities. The Knossos woman holds snakes in her hands and, as reconstructed, supports a tamed leopard-like feline on her head. When archaeologists discovered the statuette, the feline was not associated with the other fragments. If it was part of the figurine, the implied power over the animal world would be appropriate for a deity. The frontality of the figure is reminiscent of Egyptian and Mesopotamian statuary, but the costume, with its open bodice and flounced skirt is distinctly Minoan. If the statuette represents a goddess, then the Minoan is yet another example of a culture fashioning its god in the image of its people. Another Cretan example is the gold and ivory statuette of a young, youthful god from Palagastro. Did it? Yes. Okay. 5 pages left. I can do this. Harvester's Vase. The finest surviving example of Minoan relief sculpture is the so-called Harvester's Vase from Hygatriata. Only the upper half of the ostrich egg-shaped body and neck of the vessel remain. Missing are the lower parts of the harvesters, or as some think, sowers. And that's with an O-W, not E-W. And the ground on which they stand, as well as the gold leaf that originally covered the relief figures. Formulaic scenes of the sowing and harvesting were staples of Egyptian funerary art. But the Minoan artists shunned static repetition in favor of a composition filled with individually characterized figures bursting with energy. The relief shows a riotous crowd of young men singing and shouting as they go to or return from the fields. The artist vividly captures the youth's forward movement and lusty exuberance. Although most of the harvesters conform to the age-old convention of combined profile and frontal views, the relief sculptor singled out one figure from his companions. He shakes a sistrum, a percussion instrument or rattle, to beat time, and the artist depicted him in full profile with his lungs so inflated with air that his ribs show. This is one of the first instances in the history of art of a sculptor showing a keen interest in the underlying muscular and skeletal structure of the human body. The Minoan artist's painstaking study of human anatomy is a singular achievement, especially given the size of the harvester's vase, barely 5 inches at its greatest diameter. Equally noteworthy is how the sculptor recorded the tension and relaxation of facial muscles with astounding exactitude, not only for this figure but for his nearest companions as well. This degree of animation of the human face is without precedent in ancient art. Minoan Decline. Scholars dispute the circumstances ending the Minoan civilization, although most now believe that Mycenaeans had already moved on to Crete and established themselves at Knossos at the end of the New Palace period. From the palace at Knossos, these intruders appeared to have ruled the island for at least half a century, perhaps much longer. Parts of the palace continued to be occupied until its final destruction around 1200 BCE, but its importance as a cultural center faded soon after 1400 BCE, as the focus of Aegean civilization shifted to the Greek mainland. Is that it? Are we good? That thing. Oh, one more. Alright. Mycenaean Art. The origin of the Mycenaeans is also a subject of continuing debate among archaeologists and historians. The only certainty is the presence of these forerunners of the Greeks on the mainlands about the time of the construction of the old palaces on Crete. That is, about the beginning of the 2nd millennium BCE. By the middle of that millennium, a distinctive Mycenaean culture was flourishing, one that filled a prior artistic vacuum on the mainland. Archaeologists and historians have discussed the reasons for the sudden flourishing of Mycenaean art and architecture, but the phenomenon must reflect newfound wealth. Many scholars believe that the Mycenaeans were mercenaries who fought for the Egyptians and returned home with rich war booty, that the Mycenaeans accumulated great wealth and that their leaders were successful warriors was reconfirmed in 2015 when a team from the University of Cincinnati discovered at Pylos the extraordinarily rich burial of a man now known as the Griffin Warrior. The dramatic discoveries of Schliemann and his successors have fully justified Homer's characterization of mid-2nd millennium BCE Mycenae as, quote, rich in gold, even if today's archaeologists no longer view the Mycenaeans solely through the eyes of Homer. The Mycenaeans also possessed gold, but they derived their wealth from a wide network of trading partners instead of from plunder. And that is only one of the many differences between these two great prehistoric Aegean cultures. I'm going to go get water. I'll be right back. Okay. Architecture. The destruction of the Grecian palaces left the late Helladic mainland culture supreme. Although historians refer to this civilization as Mycenaean, Mycenae was but one of several large citadel complexes. Archaeologists have also unearthed Mycenaean remains at Tiryns, Orchomenos, Pylos, and elsewhere. And a section of a Mycenaean fortification wall is still in place on the Acropolis of Athens, where Thetis ruled as king. The best preserved and most impressive Mycenaean remains are those of the citadels at Tiryns and Mycenae. Tiryns. The walls of the Tiryns citadel average about 20 feet in thickness and impress visitors today as much as they did in antiquity, when they were thought to be the work of giants. In one section, Tiryns' circuit walls incorporate a long gallery covered by corbelled vaults. See corbelled vault, arches, vaults, and domes, page 97. The severity of the exterior aspect of the Mycenaean citadels did not, however, extend to their interiors, where frescoed walls were commonplace, as in the Grecian palaces. Sculptural decoration was nonetheless rare. Agamemnon's Mycenae was the exception. Lion Gate, Mycenae. The so-called Lion Gate is the outer gateway of the stronghold at Mycenae. It is protected on the left by a wall built on a natural rock outcropping, and on the right by a projecting bastion of large blocks. Any approaching enemies would have had to enter this 20-foot wide channel and face Mycenaean defenders above them on both sides. The gate itself consists of two great upright monoliths, posts, capped with a huge horizontal lintel. Above the lintel, the masonry courses form a corbelled arch, leaving an opening that lightens the weight that the lintel carries. Filling this relieving triangle is a great limestone slab with two lions in the high relief facing a central Minoan type column. I'm stuttering more than before. This is just great. The whole design admirably matches its triangular shape, harmonizing in dignity, strength, and scale with the massive stones forming the walls and gate. Similar groups appear in miniature on Cretan seals, but the concept of placing monstrous guardian figures at the entrances to palaces, tombs, and sacred places has its origins in Mesopotamia and Egypt. At Mycenae, the sculptors fashioned the animals' heads separately. Because those heads are lost, some scholars have speculated that the lions may be composite beasts, possibly sphinxes or griffins. Treasury of Atreus. The Mycenaeans erected the Lion Gate in the adjoining fortification wall circuit a few generations before the presumed date of the Trojan War. At that time, elite families buried their dead outside the citadel walls in beehive-shaped tombs covered by enormous earthen mounds. 9 such tombs remain at Mycenae, and scores more at other sites. The best preserved of these, Tholos tombs, is Mycenae's so-called Treasury of Atreus, which in the Greco-Roman era people mistakenly believed was the repository of the treasures of Atreus, father of Agamemnon and Menelaus. A long passageway, dromos, leads to a doorway surmounted by a relieving triangle similar to that in the roughly contemporaneous Lion Gate, but without figural ornamentation. Both the doorway and the relieving triangle, however, once... Wait, what? That doesn't make any sense. Oh, here we go. Once had engaged columns on each side, preserved in fragments today. The burial chamber, or thossos, consists of a series of stone corbelled courses laid on a circular base to form a lofty dome. Metalwork, sculpture, and painting. The Treasury of Atreus was thoroughly looted long before its modern rediscovery, but archaeologists have unearthed spectacular grave goods elsewhere at Mycenae, and in the grave of the Griffin warrior at Pylos. Just inside the Lion Gate, Schliemann uncovered what archaeologists call Grave Circle A. It predates the Lion Gate and the walls of Mycenae by some 3 centuries, and encloses 6 deep shafts that served as tombs for the kings and their families. The royal corpses that the Mycenaeans lowered into their deep graves had masks covering the men's faces, recalling the Egyptian funerary practice. Jewelry adorned the bodies of the women, and weapons and gold cups accompanied the men into the afterlife. Masks and daggers. The Mycenaeans used the repoussé technique to fashion the masks that Schliemann found. That is, goldsmiths hammered the shape of each mask from a single sheet of metal and pushed the features out from behind. Art historians have often compared the mask illustrated here, figure 422, to Tutankhamun's old mummy mask. But it is important to remember that the Mycenaean metalworker was one of the first in Greece to produce a sculpted image of the human face at life size. By contrast, Tutankhamun's mask stands in a long line of large-scale Egyptian sculptures going back more than a millennium. No one knows whether the Mycenaean masks were intended as portraits, but the artists took care to record different physical types. The masks found in Grave Circle A portray youthful faces as well as mature ones. The face shown in figure 422, with its full beard, must depict a mature man, perhaps a king, although not Agamemnon, as Schliemann wished. If Agamemnon was a real king, he lived some 300 years after the death of the man buried in Grave Circle A. Clearly, the Mycenaeans were, quote, rich in gold, long before Homer's heroes fought at Troy. Also found in Grave Circle A were several magnificent bronze daggers. Bronze dagger blades, inlaid with gold, silver, and niello, a black metallic alloy, against attesting to the wealth of the Mycenaean kings, as well as their warlike nature. On one side of the largest and most elaborate dagger, From Circle 8 is a scene of 4 hunters attacking a lion that has struck down a 5th hunter, while 2 other lions flee. The other side, not illustrated, depicts lions attacking deer. The slim-waist, long-haired figures are Minoan in style, but the artist borrowed long-haired figures are Minoan in style, but the artist borrowed the subject from the repertoire of Egypt and Mesopotamia. There were no lions in Greece at this date. It is likely that a Minoan metalworker made the dagger for a Mycenaean patron who admired Minoan art, but whose tastes in subject matter differed from those of his Cretan counterparts. Vafeo cups? That's what I'm going with. Vafeo cups. Excavations at other Mycenaean sites have produced several additional luxurious objects decorated with Minoan style figures. Chief among them is the pair of gold drinking cups from Tholos' tomb at Vafeo. The Vafeo cup illustrated here also made using the repoussé technique, is probably the work of a Cretan goldsmith. Both cups represent hunters attempting to capture wild bulls, probably for the bulls game, staged in the courtyards of the Cretan palaces. The men have long hair, bare chests, and narrow waists, and they closely resemble the figures on the Minoan harvester's vase, and the hunters on the dagger blade from grave circle A. The other cup, not illustrated, depicts hunters trying to snare bulls in nets. One bull has already been trapped. The artist's choice of an unusual contorted posture for the bull effectively suggests the animal struggled to free itself. To either side, a bull gallops away from the trap. One of them tramples his would-be captor. Most art historians think that the goldsmith depicted 3 successive episodes in the hunter's attempt to capture a bull using a cow as bait. If so, the story reads from right to left. First, the bull follows the decoy cow. Then, at the right in figure 424, the bull and the cow, quote, converse. Finally, a hunter sneaks up behind the bull and succeeds in catching its left hind leg in a noose. Whatever the significance of the theme, the setting is in a carefully delineated landscape of trees and rocks is noteworthy, as is the exceptional technical and artistic quality of the cups. Ivory goddesses. Gold was not the only luxurious material that elite Mycenaean patrons demanded for the objects they commissioned. For a shrine within the palace at Mycenaean, a master sculptor carved an intricately detailed group of 2 women and a child from a single piece of costly imported ivory. The women's costumes with breasts exposed have the closest parallels in Minoan art, and the statuette, like the Vafeo cups, is probably of the Cretan manufacture. The intimate and tender theme also is foreign to the known Mycenaean repertoire, in which scenes of hunting and warfare dominate. The identity of the 3 figures remains a mystery. Some scholars have suggested that the two women are the 2 queens mentioned in inscriptions found in the excavation of the Mycenaean palace at Pylos. Others have speculated that the 2 women are deities, Mycenaean forerunners of the Greek agricultural goddesses Demeter and Persephone. See The Gods and Goddesses of Mount Olympus, page 107, and that the child is Triptolemos. I'm so sorry. The hero who spread the gift of agriculture to the Greeks. That myth, however, probably postdates the Mycenaean era. Life-size statuary. In the 2nd millennium BCE, large-scale figural art was very rare on the Greek mainland, as on Crete. Other than the paintings that once adorned the walls of Mycenaean palaces, the triangle relief of the Lion Gate at Mycenae is exceptional, as is the painted plaster head of a woman or goddess, or perhaps sphinx, found at Mycenae. The white flesh tone indicates that the head is female. The hair and the eyes are dark blue, almost black, and the lips, ears, and headband are red. The artist decorated the cheeks and chin with red circles surrounded by a ring of red dots, recalling the facial paint or tattoos recorded on early Cycladic figurines of women. Although the large, staring eyes give the face of a menacing, if not terrifying, expression appropriate for a guardian figure such as a sphinx, the closest parallels to this work in the Prehistoric Aegean are terracotta images of goddesses. This head may therefore be a fragment of a very early life-size cult statue in Greece, many times the height of the Palai youth. Were it not for this plaster head and a few other exceptional pieces, art historians might have concluded, wrongly, that the Mycenaeans had no large-scale freestanding statuary, a reminder that it is always dangerous to generalize from the chance remains of an ancient civilization. Nonetheless, Mycenaean life-size statuary must have been rare, and no large stone statue has ever been found in the prehistoric Aegean world, in striking contrast to Egypt and Mesopotamia. After the collapse of Mycenaean civilization, and for the next several hundred years, no attempts at large-scale statuary in any material are evident in the Aegean until, after the waning of the so-called Dark Ages, Greek sculptors became exposed to the great sculptural tradition of Egypt. Scrolling. Okay. Warrior vase. An art form that did continue throughout the period after the downfall of the Mycenaean palaces was vase painting. One of the latest examples of Mycenaean painting is the crater, bowl for mixing wine and water, commonly called the warrior vase, after its prominent frieze of soldiers marching off to war. At the left, a woman bids farewell to the column of heavily armed warriors moving away from her. The painting on this vase has no indication of setting and lacks the landscape elements that commonly appear in early Minoan and Mycenaean art. Although the painter depicts the soldiers using both silhouette and outline, all repeat the same pattern of combined frontal and profile views, a far cry from the variety and anecdotal detail of the lively procession shown on the Minoan harvester's vase. This simplification of narrative has parallels in the increasingly schematic and abstract treatments of marine life on other painted vases, and I'm running out of breath. The octopus, for example, eventually became a stylized motif composed of concentric circles and spirals that are almost unrecognizable as a sea creature. By Homer's time, the greatest days of Aegean civilization were but a distant memory, and the men and women of Crete and Mycenae, Minos and Ariadne, I think I said it wrong again, Minos and Ariadne, Agamemnon and Helen had assumed the stature of heroes from a lost golden age. And we've got a big picture, and that is thankfully the end. Wish me luck with all my work. I wish you luck with yours. I hope this helped.